Okay, we're going to mix things up a little bit. We are trying a new format for the next half hour to give you a taste for some of the talent that'll be available to you in our breakout sessions. So we have something we're calling flash presentations. We're going to have 3 10-minute presentations, and the third 10-minute presentation is going to be broken up into 2 5-minute segments. So what we're going to have, and I'll introduce him first in just a minute, is John Warniak from SEMA, talking about racing to autonomy, followed by Daniel Groves speaking about workforce development and the white paper they have available today. And each of those individuals will be speaking in a breakout session, followed by 2 partners from the Constangy Brooks law firm, Bill Principe, who will be speaking about OSHA updates, and Jeff Thompson, who will be speaking out about updates from the U.S. Supreme Court. And it's not what's in the news. It's about various legal updates, class action information. So please stay tuned, give them your attention. It sort of fits me. It's a very short attention span, 10 minutes and you're done. And you'll get a good taste for what's going to be coming up next. So let's start with John Warniak from SEMA, Racing to Autonomy.
Well, good morning. Good morning. And welcome to SAC 2018. Probably more appropriately, welcome to Automotive 4.0, or what I'm going to call Automobility 4.0. Because it truly is, as SAC is a movement, still 10 years, if you will, growing from 100 to 1,000 people today over the last 10 years, the movement is what's driving Automobility 4.0. And 2 of the hallmarks of Automobility 4.0 are collaboration and generative design. We'll talk about collaboration. So why is SEMA, Specialty Equipment Market Association, why are aftermarket folks here? Because of collaboration. No one is rich enough or smart enough to do this alone in Automobility 4.0, and we'll give you some points of that. So make sure you come to our session at 10:30. We're going to talk about the promise, the hype, the reality, and we have a special treat for you today with Mr. Corky Coker here. You may know him from his television show as well as former chairman of SEMA. He created my job at SEMA. So that's part of the reason why I'm here today. And I'm glad and I'm honored to have Corky here. So if you want to hear about the passion about the industry, come hear Corky's story because he's got plenty of stories to tell. I'm going to move through this very quickly. We got 10 minutes. If you think about what's happening in the racing, racing is the Gemba, the Genchi Genbutsu. Go to the front lines. Racing is all about 2 things, problem solving and technology demonstration on the world stage. When you put yourself and your technology and your brand out on the racetrack, you are literally showcasing what your capabilities are. So it's a big step to do that. And if you've seen the movie The Faster Horse, great story about the Mustang and Ford performance, it's all about disruption. Well, I'm here to tell you, it's not about a faster horse. We stopped going faster at the Indianapolis 500 in 1993. Topped out about 223 miles per hour. It's all about making a smarter horse. And SEMA is all about creating a new generation of cool that we'll talk about as well at 9:30, because there are different generations and there are different segments, if you will, of cool and what's emerging in the race to autonomy. Take a look at that top shelf. If you look at all the things that SEMA members and automobile manufacturers and suppliers have put on the shelf in the last 50 years, it's pistons, it's cranks, it's tires, it's wheels, everything you see there, and offerings to the gods of speed. Well, today, you look at the bottom shelf, it's offering to the gods of autonomy. It's Velodyne lidars, the laser radars. It's Mobileye cameras. It's NVIDIA computers. And they're not just CPUs, they're GPUs that can process 13 trillion operations per second. It's like having 1,000 swim lanes of information going back and forth, always on board the cars. And then using racing to actually demonstrate some of that is what we'll talk about. Anybody go to Goodwood festival of speed, which is really the festival of technology today, take a look at what's happening with RoboCar and RoboRace. Pretty cool stuff, but don't make the mistake of the point of taking the driver out of the loop. RoboRace is not about motorsports entertainment, going to the track. I mean, Formula E is there today. RoboRace is decades beyond that. It's not sports entertainment or esports yet. What it is a demonstration of the problem-solving technology of artificial intelligence and machine language and software and sensor fusion in an extreme environment. For 50 years, motorsports led the industry in terms of innovations, and the celebrities and the drivers that drove the cars were exactly that, celebrities. It's the same thing with RoboCar and we're a race to autonomy, but it's teams of engineers, teams of business, teams of marketers that will be driving the cars through customized algorithms. So you're competing on the software. It's not a programmed car. It sees and learns every time it goes around the track. So lots of cool things happening with racing. And as I mentioned, with Automobility 4.0, collaboration is one of the hallmarks. And one of my favorite philosophers was Yogi Berra, not the cartoon, Corky. But basically, if to paraphrase Yogi, he said, if you don't want to collaborate, no one will stop you. So you gotta want to do it. So collaboration is part of it. The other part is generative design. You have to have the ability to bring these tools, a lot of the tools you'll be hearing about in the next 2 days, into your operations. And you have to do two things today. You got to run 2 races. The first race is operational excellence. That's running the same race faster. The second race you have to run at the same time is strategic positioning. That's running a different race. You got to do both today to win in Automobility 4.0. Cars are still cool. And the automotive industry arguably went away for a bit, but if you really want to see the excitement, SEMA is the catalyst for doing that. And we have a great calibration here. If you don't believe it, talk to Miss Kaylee Holt. Kaylee, could you stand up, please? That's Kaylee. 20 years old, Kaylee snuck her way into the SEMA show, 2015, and that was the spark, the catalyst for her saying, I want to be part of this great industry that we're all part of. And SEMA is the Gemba for a lot of the cool stuff. And who's going to define cool? Well, it's Kaylee and her friends, the next generation of cool. How to make cars cool. SEMA was instrumental in socializing speed. 53 years ago, I think, Corky, started under the bleachers, kind of like this, at Dodger Stadium with 13 companies. Those same 13 companies that started 53 years ago continue on with SEMA today, and now it's 7,000 members, roughly 46 billion of all the stuff you don't need, but everything you want. So we'll be talking about that. So glad to have Kayla here join us as well, and Corky and Richard Wallace. So we got a great session coming up. So I want to close there. Who knows what car that is up on the upper left? Any show of hands? Where's the Porsche, folks? That's the Porsche 919 Spyder, won Le Mans 3 times. Basically, it goes from 400 horsepower rear-wheel drive to 1,000 horsepower all-wheel drive hybrid, electrified axles, a lot of electrification. So if you're not paying attention to racing, performance, or electrification, or the aftermarket today, start now. See you at 10:30. Thank you.
We are currently in the 112th month of this post-recession recovery. That's the second longest in at least 125 years, maybe longer. The longest was 120 months. We don't know how long that'll last. Most economists say 9, 12, maybe 15 months down the road before there's a little bit of a downturn, but it could be longer. It could be as much as 20, 24, maybe even 30 months. We don't know. But what we do know is this. Today, the economy is dynamic and robust. And that's important. Yet despite that, we have a significant challenge in our workforce development system in the United States. We're arguing over what's the right wage to pay someone to flip a hamburger or to make a cappuccino. Nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, we don't have enough workers who are skilled, who don't know how to lay concrete or read a tape measure or weld or connect two sewer lines. We don't have enough workers with the skills that are needed to do the jobs that folks in this room care about the most. And that's a significant challenge. And so the Southern States Automotive Contractors Association has delivered a white paper that helps outline what these challenges are and also what the solutions are to address this problem. And so I encourage you to stop by booth 826 over here to my right, your left, and get a copy of that. But let's explore that for just a minute. The economy is strong, as I mentioned. Industrial spending, which is the spending that folks in this room are doing, is expected over the next few years to grow. We're one of the largest automotive industries in the world in the United States, and the Southeast is driving that. As you can see, the Southeast spending in the automotive industry represents 20 to 25% of that spending, and so it's significant. And all of that is driving demand for skilled workers. Workers like millwrights and machinists and welders and engineers and techs, the skills we care about the most in this room, and yet there's a shortage. And this is a significant challenge. And so what are we going to do about that? Because these skills aren't learned overnight. So let's assume for a minute that we bring someone new into the workforce in 2018. It takes about 3 to 5 years to get that individual minimally competent. Now, I realize that depending on the individual and the particular discipline they're training for, that time can vary, but on average, 3 to 5 years. It takes another 3 to 5 years to get them to a journeyman type of status, so they're highly competent on a job. But here's the problem. The clock and the calendar are working against us. So when you look at what's expected to happen over the next couple of years, just based on birth dates, folks are retiring. We're going to lose about 16% of our workforce. These are the most highly skilled workers. Over the next 5 years, we're going to lose about 22%. Over 10 years, that number swells to 34%. And by the time the last of the baby boomers turn 65, around 2029, we will have lost somewhere in the range of 45 to 50% of our most highly skilled workforce. It's a real challenge. So when we need those seasoned professionals, and we do, we can't wait. We've got to get started. We've got to do it now, but we're not doing the types of things that are needed. So why does all this matter? Well, when you look at the empirical research that's been done over the last few years, there's one clear thing that stands out. The severity of the shortage that you're experiencing has a direct impact on project performance. If you're a project owner in this room, what are the 4 things you care about the most? Cost, Schedule, quality, safety. Not necessarily in that order. Safety is usually first, and it should be. But those are the four things: cost, quality, schedule, safety. Yet when you look at the most recent research and survey work that we've done, most folks in this marketplace are experiencing moderate to severe workforce shortages. So that means they're experiencing on average about a 17% increase in budget, about a 23% increase in their schedule, and 2 to 3, even up to 4 times more safety incidents. Now you might say, well, we can mitigate that, and yes, you can. You can mitigate schedule, you can mitigate cost, but the research shows empirically is that the presence of one means the presence of all. And none of us are willing to accept more safety challenges. So we have a real issue here. But there's a disconnect between what the business industry expects and needs and what they're willing to do and what's happening in the marketplace from a workforce development perspective. And this is a real serious challenge. And so we've been researching over the last 3 years, what is it that's happening globally with respect to workforce development? What are others doing well? What are we doing well or poorly? And how do we change this system to make it work better? And so what we've done is we've created a series of 7 recommendations that we feel and are confident will transform the marketplace. But the challenge we have here is one of leadership. I think that's the biggest challenge we have in workforce development. The right leadership can make a real difference. Let's think back to the 1990s when safety was such a major issue in our industry. What did owners say? They said, that's enough. We're going to change this marketplace, and there's no opt-out, so if you want to work on our projects, we're going to be safe. And what happened? It changed. So what are we doing now? We're talking about 0 incidents, or how close to 0 can we get and stay? That's transformation. Any one of these policies that you see on the screen right now, if implemented, would improve the marketplace, but all of them together have the capacity to be transformative. So the question is, are we willing to make workforce development a priority as we did with safety? When we do, it'll make a difference. We've all seen one of these, right? It's just an ordinary domino, nothing special about it. But if you stop to think about the power of one domino, we know what it is. It's called the domino effect. If we were to stack a successive line of dominoes in a row and we pushed it, they would all fall over. Let's think about that differently. What if we were to stack or line up dominoes and each one is 50% greater or larger than the one in front of it? And now we push that over. What kind of power does it have? Well, by the time you get to the 18th domino, you could knock over the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Now you might say, well, of course, it's already leaning. And yes, that's true. But by the time you get to the 23rd domino, you could knock over the Eiffel Tower. And by the time you get to the 29th domino, you could knock over the Empire State Building. You say, now, Daniel, that's great, but so what? Here's the point. Every one of us in our sphere of influence, in our communities, in our company, have the capacity to take the small steps. We may think they're inconsequential, but they're meaningful because the cumulative effect of each one of these steps that you take has the ability to transform the marketplace. And so the question is, again, are we willing to take those steps? Are we willing to make workforce development a priority? Are we willing to push over that first domino and take each of these steps that are necessary to really change the marketplace? So we're going to talk about all of this more at 10:30 in Ballroom F in the Workforce Development breakout session. I hope you'll come to it. And I also hope you'll stop by the Southern States Automotive Contractors Association booth 826 and find out how you can get a copy of this report. There's no cost. And if you're interested in all these kinds of things, the SSACA organization is the kind of organization that you want to be part of. And so I encourage you to come by, figure out how you can get a copy of this, and find out what you can be doing in your workplace, in your sphere of influence to really change the marketplace. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Bill Principe. I want to talk to you about OSHA. For those of you who thought that there would be a rollback of any sort as a result of the Trump administration, you'd be wrong. I looked at the recent OSHA citations that have been issued since just the beginning of August, and since August 1st, there's been 18 citations issued around the country that involve over 100,000, many of them $200,000 and $300,000. 3 of these people are in what's called the Severe Violator Enforcement Program. So again, there was some thought that that program might go away, but it's continuing, and the budget that is about to be approved increases OSHA's budget by $5 million. As a consequence, enforcement is going to continue. There's not going to be any difference in the type of enforcement that has existed over the last really 8 to 10 years. Now, there's 2 important changes that have affected the way you deal with OSHA. One is that now you have to self-report to OSHA whenever one of your employees gets injured and gets hospitalized. You have 24 hours to call that into OSHA, and a large percentage of those cases are going to result in OSHA showing up to do an inspection. The other significant change in the OSHA world is the size of the penalties. Beginning in 2016, a serious violation, which is sort of the garden variety lowest common denominator OSHA violation, is now assessed up to almost $13,000. So the stakes have gone up significantly. If you are found to have committed what's called a repeat or a willful violation, the penalties are now up to $129,000. And as a consequence, that's why you're seeing much more significant citations. So the stakes have gone way up in the OSHA world. So in that we know that OSHA is now you can predict when OSHA is going to come to your place, there's really a couple things I wanted to bring to your attention to make sure that you were prepared for the inspection. And that is, the first thing is that there's something called the Marjack poultry case. The Marjack poultry case involved the following. When OSHA comes to do an inspection, and this was a case where the employee had been hurt, they were hospitalized, the company had to call OSHA, and OSHA showed up. Ordinarily, you want to keep the OSHA inspection as narrowly focused as possible. And the narrow focus would be, what was the injury? And I want to limit the inspection to just looking at what were the facts surrounding that injury. But OSHA is always trying to push the envelope. OSHA is always trying to expand the scope of the inspection. And in this Marjack poultry case, all poultry facilities in northern Georgia are in what's called a regional emphasis program, which means that all poultry facilities are targeted for increased inspections. And so when OSHA went in to look at an electric arc incident, they attempted to expand the inspection plant-wide, simply because the company was part of this regional emphasis program. The company fought it, and the Northern Georgia District Court decided that OSHA is not allowed to automatically expand inspection simply because you're part of an emphasis program, or simply by looking at your OSHA 300 log and saying, well, the OSHA 300 log shows injuries everywhere. So it's a very important thing for all of you to keep in mind. Make sure you try to force the issue with OSHA so that you're not allowing them to expand the inspections unnecessarily. The second big development that has just happened is there's a new definition that the OSHA Review Commission is applying for repeat violations. A repeat violation happens whenever you get a citation, and it may be an inconsequential, other than serious citation, and sometimes those are issued with no penalty. And a lot of companies make the mistake of just automatically saying, well, good, it didn't cost me anything, I'll accept it. Once you accept and resolve one of those citations, it becomes a final order, And for the next 5 years, that final order, whatever the violation was, can be the basis for a repeat violation. And again, I said the penalties for repeats can be up to $129,000. Now, in the past, OSHA was simply saying, what was the standard that you got cited for before, and have you been cited for doing the same thing now? And that's all it was in order to get a repeat. With this new decision, what they have decided is that they're going to look to see what effort did you make to correct that first inspection and or first violation. And in essence, it becomes good faith. If you can demonstrate that you tried your best to correct all of those violations, even if they find a violation under the same standard, it will not necessarily be a repeat. So it's a big new decision. It's very important to keep in mind when you're going to defend yourself. I've already exceeded my 5 minutes. Those of you who have heard me speak before know I'm exceptionally long-winded, so you're very fortunate that this was just a 5-minute presentation. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I passed the first test. I made it up on the stage without falling. Everything else is downhill from here. We should be all right. I'm Jeff Thompson. I'm with Constangy, Brooks, Smith & Profit, and I'm here today to talk to you about arbitration agreements. For years, these class actions have been occurring, and as many of you know, these really started back in the 70s and 80s with the asbestos industry. Then moved to tobacco, and there were a group of lawyers that really made a lot of money on this. Well, along the way, other plaintiffs' lawyers got involved, and they started looking at the Fair Labor Standards Act. And what they found under the Fair Labor Standards Act is, if you can show a violation, then you get attorney's fees. And so they began to file what's called collective actions as a result. And folks, if I owned a business, that would be the thing I would be the most concerned about, would be some type of collective action under wage and hour. I always said that if I was going to go into the plaintiff side of this, I wouldn't handle discrimination claims and so forth. I would handle these Fair Labor Standards Act collective claims. So that's the direction that a lot of the law firms went. And we've got a number of them we've been handling, and they're very expensive to defend. And quite often they can find some violation so they can get attorney's fees. Well, along the way, companies started looking at ways to put a stop to this. And so they started inserting arbitration agreements. When employees would come on board, they would require them to sign an agreement saying that if you have a problem related to something to work, then you have to file it through arbitration. You wouldn't go through the normal channels. And for many of those types of cases, discrimination claims and so forth, that worked great. Well, then they came and companies started putting these types of agreements for class actions or collective actions, saying that you couldn't get involved in a class action or a collective action. You had to go through the arbitration process. And the plaintiffs' bar, quite naturally, as you can imagine, pushed back on that. And then the district courts around the country started having inconsistent decisions on this issue. Well, it finally made its way to the Supreme Court. And in May of this year, the Supreme Court said that you can, in fact, insert these arbitration provisions in for collective actions and class actions. Now, folks, you know, when you come to a session, you hope you can take a few points out. From a legal perspective, I would tell you, I would write this one down and I would take it back with me. Go back and look and consider putting these arbitration provisions, particularly on class action and collective actions, in your contracts, your employment contracts, or when employees come on board with the organization as part of what they agree to in order to work there, they have to sign these agreements. The reason for it is it's a lot less costly. It's generally can handle a lot faster. Also, there's confidentiality involved, which helps. And then on top of that, you can get it resolved so much quicker rather than sitting in federal court. So what we're looking at now is these types of agreements and saying, based on this Supreme Court decision, you should be able to do this. It was, and the Supreme Court decision actually came out of several cases. It was an epic decision, and interestingly enough, it was Epic Systems was the name of the case. But there were several involved. In one of the cases, for those of you who have dealt with labor issues, they found that it was not a violation of the National Labor Relations Act to preclude employees from being able to opt into these class actions. Again, what I'm telling clients is that's something we need to look at based on the Supreme Court decision. You should consider that in your with your employees, both current as well as those that are coming on. Thank you and God bless.